That brings us to item number 8 on the agenda. I recognize Dr. Melton for the superintendent report.
Mr. Cates, thank you so much. Let me do a quick sound check. And Sydney, do I need to unmute my mic on my Chromebook or this pick up? Okay, I'm still checking volume. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Thank you, Sydney. Good evening, everyone. Board members, thank you so much for this opportunity to offer a couple of reports this evening. As an administrative staff, we have read Sam Glenn's book entitled Attitude is a Choice. And one of the quotes from the book that I've used recently is from Sam Glenn: input creates output. Input creates output. In School District 5, our administrators, our staff has been working so diligently to make sure that our input creates a positive output on School District 5. I'd like to thank our staff, our faculty who all returned on last Thursday. I'd like to thank our administrators, our school teams, our district office teams, because all the work they've done throughout the summer has prepared us to welcome our teachers and staff back on last Thursday. I do believe with confidence that School District 5 is poised and thoughtfully prepared for a successful return. As we get prepared for this evening's 2 reports, we are mindful of our motto for the last 3 years of educational researcher John Hattie: know thy impact. The first report we have this evening is definitely regarding an impact that we're making all across School District 5, and that is focused upon our reentry plan. This is our 4th update this evening that we're offering to you. This, of course, is situated in the context of ever-changing dynamic information. I've been consistent to compare this with the weather incident, although there is no radar to predict what we may be looking towards when we are having a successful start on September the 8th. But today we continue to monitor numbers, and we're looking at, according to results today from DHEC, 543 cases. So South Carolina is showing a decline, and we are watchful of that trend and hopeful that will continue to be a decline. For our report this evening, I'm going to ask Ms. Goggins if she'll make her way to the podium to get us started. The first slide that we have for this evening is focused upon our 5 guiding principles. We've been consistent to show this presentation slide because as we work towards reopening, we wanted to make sure that we grounded our work with principles. So if you look from the bottom left around the circle to Principle 5, the first one, of course, is situated on the stakeholder, the decisions that we're making to make sure that we have viable options for our families. The second principle in the upper left-hand corner is to focus our actions around the safety and the social and emotional well-being of our students and our staff. The third principle is inclusive of our work on student achievement and the long-term impact that it's going to make, both current impact and then long-term. And then Principle 4, the actions that we have that are aligned with my superintendent's priorities, which have been board approved for 2 years now, going into year 3. And then the 5th principle, of course, is focused upon the flexibility. If you talk with our faculty and staff since their return, you hear the consistent flexibility request, because this, as I said earlier, is dynamic and ever-changing context of which we're working. I'm proud to say this evening an announcement that I'd like for everyone to know that I've informed the board in regards to the social and emotional well-being of our staff. We have recently signed a partnership with the Hayden Hurst Foundation. We're trying to make sure that we have appropriate resources that are relevant to our students and the partnerships that we can build upon. So we celebrate the fact that we've got the Hurst Foundation associated with School District 5, and we look forward to what that impact will be in a positive way to benefit our students and supportive of the staff that are involved. Ms. Goggins is going to talk with us first this evening about some updates regarding our communications with our reentry efforts. Ms. Goggins.
For students, School District 5 is providing written communications, videos, and updates to help our staff and families prepare. Our aim is to share factual information in a timely manner as it becomes available and as we assess feedback from the community. So we've sent messages to parents and to staff on a variety of topics. Our video series have been launched. We shared a video on LEAP last week and another on the reentry web page in general to remind parents and staff where they can get the most up-to-date information, and that's the video that you see here. We have a number of videos scheduled this week and next week as we use video to reiterate some of the written communications we have shared. For example, we've already sent out informative videos on 5, which was posted on social media on July 30th. And we will post another video that gives our parents further insight on what the 5 program will be like. Social media gives us a landing page or site for our information and allows us to share details beyond our parents and our community. We are also done some media interviews recently and continue to get requests this week from media outlets. In fact, was texted a few minutes ago by a reporter who informed me that we have a segment airing tonight on a local station. And we have graphics to help illustrate details and informational points in a concise manner. In addition to our video projects and written communications, the Office of Communications has worked on marketing of the 5 program to include the creation of a logo for the virtual program. You can see the logo here on the slide, along with some mock-ups of graphics we can use on social media or websites. We've also worked with Dr. Gina Blunt, the new administrator of the 5 program, on engagement tools like social media, website presence to help build a sense of community for the 5 students and families, while finding ways to also keep them engaged in their home schools. And then finally, interfacing with our parents and community is important to us, as is providing a high-quality customer service experience, even during COVID. We anticipate that we will see an increase in the number of people requesting to visit our front offices as we get a little closer to the start of school for our students. And we want to share information about our front office protocols tonight with the board. A little background. Offices have been closed to varying degrees across the district since March due to COVID, but we continue to conduct business through appointments and coordination as we limited the visitors who enter the building. So now we ask ourselves some key questions. How do we open front offices safely? What will front office visitation look like? And when should we open offices across the district? Here are the protocols we developed for schools. First, we asked the schools to look at safety and capacity in their front offices. Do they have barriers, signage, sanitation stations, etc. in place? We also asked them to look at the space in their front office to consider the means for social distancing. And because our front office spaces vary from site to site, we know it will vary for school to school. Next, we established a plan for district-wide front office procedures and a way to communicate that with the appropriate groups. So offices will limit the number of people in the lobby and communicate safety measures. That's going to be via some signage and messaging that we're working on this week. Signage will be placed near the front entrances, asking visitors to call the front office. We'll also share those protocols with staff, parents, and the public using website and other means. Signage will encourage our visitors to wait in their vehicles and proceed to the front office after receiving a call back from our front office staff. Our front office staff will tell them when it's safe to enter the facility. And then staff should set up appointment times for visitors when possible and encourage our parents to conduct any business electronically when at all possible. The last step for us is implementation. So offices in School District 5 will open on the first day of LEAP, which is August 31st. And as we said before, we will communicate this with staff, our families, and the public so our visitors to our schools know what to expect. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Giuliano, Chief Instructional Officer, to provide some information regarding LEAP.
Thank you, Ms. Goggins. So next up we have LEAP information, and the acronym for LEAP is Learn, Evaluate, Analyze, Prepare. We cannot take credit for that acronym. That was created by the State Department of Education. So I'm going to highlight some information about our LEAP days. First and foremost, the South Carolina Department of Education made a request for LEAP days, and it was approved by the General Assembly, and it's mandatory for all school districts within the state of South Carolina. So LEAP days are mandatory across the state, and they must be used for face-to-face instruction. They must take place before the start of the traditional calendar. And the audience for these is pre-kindergarten through 8th grade. So our funding is from the state is for pre-kindergarten through 8th grade students and pre-kindergarten through 8th grade staff. Every pre-K through 8th grade student invited to at least one LEAP day. So even our students that participate in the 5 program, they're invited, but they must come in for face-to-face instruction. All of these parameters that you see on the screen are based upon school districts receiving funding through the State Department of Education and the General Assembly. So staff that work these days, they'll be paid through their daily rate of pay, through funding provided by the General Assembly, which is very similar to our academic recovery camp. We receive funding through the state as well for our academic recovery camp this summer, and we utilize that money to provide that instruction for our students from kindergarten through 3rd grade this summer. So similar to that, we're receiving funding through the General Assembly for a daily rate of pay as well for our staff. Our focus for the LEAP days. This is going to vary per school, but these are some examples of some of the areas that will be focused upon. Social emotional learning preparation, device checkout and distance learning orientation, routines and procedures, getting used to getting back into the building, and the routines and procedures that are taking place that will be highlighted a little bit later in this presentation. Testing for identified students that can take place at this time, and staff professional development. So when staff are not teaching students on these days, they'll have an opportunity to participate in professional development, especially around our distance learning and virtual learning. And School District 5, just like other districts in our state, had to submit a plan to be approved by the South Carolina Department of Education, which we did, and it was approved on August 10th. We submitted interest surveys to our families back in June to see who may be interested in LEAP days as we prepared. And then in late July through early August, we did commitment surveys to our families. Schools sent these surveys specifically to their families so we could determine how many students were interested in participating. As of right now, we have approximately 25% of our pre-K through 8th grade student population that are scheduled to participate in LEAP, and approximately 95% of our pre-K through 8 staff will participate in LEAP as planned at this moment. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harris for our next part of our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Juliana. The administration has established an opportunity for families to request what's called a reentry hardship. And this reentry hardship is an opportunity for those families requesting to change their instructional option before or prior to the district's pre-established dates. Those pre-established dates are, as you see on the screen, consistent with what we have reported in prior reentry plans, and that is that families of elementary school students can commit to at least a quarter, and those families of secondary students commit to at least a semester before requesting a change for instructional options. Now, we recognize that with all of what we do, there are instances where there are special circumstances that would need further consideration. And with that in mind, there is a set of criteria that would advise us regarding what's called a reentry hardship criteria. And those are 5 items that I'd like to share with you, and that's a documented medical exemption. Those are legal accommodations, religious accommodations or exemptions. There's a special needs accommodation, as well as there is a language barrier accommodation, recognizing that we have various and sundry languages and cultures represented throughout School District 5. There's a dedicated email that our technology staff were so proficient in providing for us to assist our families throughout the community, reentry hardship request at lexrich5.org. And we'd like to conclude this particular segment by indicating that with all of that, these approvals are based on contingent upon spacing and availability of space in the respective areas that parents might request. So with that in mind, that concludes our statement regarding reentry hardship requests. We'll turn the floor over to, or the microphone rather, to, I do believe, Mr. Cannon.
As Mr. Cannon transitions to the podium, we believe that pictures are powerful. You know, we've always heard a photograph is worth 1,000 words, so we've got a variety of photographs that Mr. Cannon has captured for us. Mr. Giuliano referenced starting in his presentation 2 funding sources that School District 5 has taken advantage of to include Leap Days and our Academic Recovery Camp, a separate event that occurred earlier in the summer. So the report that Mr. Cannon has given this evening is going to have some photographs to show things that are happening all across School District 5 as examples of how funds have been used to make sure that our physical environment is prepared to welcome back our students, since we've already welcomed back our staff. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, Dr. Melton. As Dr. Melton said, what we felt like the best way to kind of show is through the use of pictures for this, to show what our staff's been doing throughout the spring and summer in preparation to get our schools ready. I wouldn't be doing justice if I didn't acknowledge Mr. David Shealy and our facility staff. David is a 30-plus year employee of the district, and in the late spring, we found out acrylic plexiglass was, of course, in high demand. It was going to be a little bit of an issue obtaining it. So, the picture on the far right, David spent about 3 weeks in our warehouse, sweating, diligently making various sneeze guard barriers to be used for summer programs, for testing services. And so I want to personally thank David Shealy, and if any of y'all see him, please thank him, because he did us a lot of justice for our summer programs and preparing them. This Thursday, the picture on the left, you'll see we'll be receiving about 1,200 dividers of various shapes and sizes that will be used for our counseling services, for elementary groups, small instruction, and so we'll be receiving that at the end of this week. Not only was plexiglass and acrylic an issue, wipes has been, as you all know, in high demand. I want to thank our partners at Prisma Health. They gave us a significant donation of wipes that they were not going to use, and so we, standing here today, I can tell you we've got multiple packs of wipes for every teacher in this district. So we were glad to give that. We wanted to give teachers something for the classroom to help them feel safe, to use when they feel the need, and so I can say that we've got wipes available for every classroom. We've helped schools provide decals. We are continuing to do that. We received floor arrows this morning, so those will be distributed tomorrow. We've given each school hand sanitizer dispensers for all their high traffic common areas, and we also have hand sanitizer for every classroom in the district. Picture you can see here is from the Cates Center. So the left picture would be, they've got the nice sneeze guards for their front office, and then some of the barriers that Mr. Shealy provided. We knew the Cates Center would be hopefully operating near capacity when school returns, and so of course they have many computer labs there, and so these are some of the barriers that Mr. Shealy made for their computer labs. Just some more pictures here. Again, the dividers that were being made on the left, and a purchase of the wipes in the middle. And then on the far right, I'm sure many of you have read, have heard, many districts across the state, as we've been in communication, have purchased electrostatic sprayers. Our district has begun receiving our order that we made back at the 1st of June. And these aren't intended to replace our normal cleaning, disinfecting operations, but each school will have these should we need to disinfect the school quickly, large areas overnight when a building's not occupied. Every school will have these available to use. These are just some pictures of in our warehouse. Of course, we've had to restock for hand sanitizer, and then on the right will be our disinfectant that used for buses and also food service. And then finally, our facility staff's been available this summer to meet with every school to look at cafeteria capacities, front office capacities, assist with classroom setup. Again, I want to thank, a couple weeks in April, our facility staff, took a couple weeks off for precautionary measures just because we didn't know what this virus was doing and what it's going to look like. But our facility staff, our maintenance staff, has been at work since the 1st of May. I can sit here and tell you we've all made it through safely. They're excited for school to start, and we're very well prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Mr. Cates, I'd like to make sure that I conclude. During the introductions, I expressed my appreciation for a variety of folks, but I wanted to save not the best to the last, but some of the most hardworking until the last. Many of the representatives of reentry are over to my right of our reentry committee, and then, of course, the work of our directors and our executive staff. If they would just lift their hands so that you can see some of the faces involved with our reentry, I'd like to make sure that, let me pause again. If you would just lift your hand if you're involved with reentry, thank you. They don't always follow requests. These are representatives from a committee that has worked throughout the summer to make sure that we're prepared. You've heard us say before, we started preparing for reentry on March the 16th when we were in the process of closing, waiting for new information, changing information, but this team has proven to be flexible and responsive, and we're constantly having to monitor what were we told before, what do we hear today, how does that affect School District 5. So the patience of our staff is to be commended, their understanding is to be appreciated, and the leadership of this team is to be applauded, because I am grateful for the thoughtful work they've done and the collaborative efforts they've made. We are stronger in School District 5 because input does create and influence output. Mr. Cates, that's the completion of the first of 2 reports. I will pause for questions.
Any questions for Dr. Melton? Mr. Lovelace.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Okay. I guess I'll ask you, but Clay Cannon is probably the one that needs to answer this. But this also goes to policy EBR, which is later for comment, I think, in our program. But have there been any upgrades in the HVAC system to increase the number of air changes per hour, or HVAC ductwork, things like ozone purifiers or any other kind of air purifiers?
I'm delighted that Mr. Cannon and Mr. Richardson have been ordering a variety of materials and working with a variety of contractors. Mr. Cannon, is that one that you'd like to answer, or would you prefer Mr. Richardson become involved with that? So I see you at their podium already, so I'll pause to see. I'm assuming that you're comfortable fielding that question or the follow-up that you need to do.
Sure. Mr. Lovelace, great question. I know many news outlets ran with those stories this weekend, because I have many emails in my inbox this morning for that very topic. We are working with our Synergistic, who's our energy consultant, so we've been working with them over the last few weeks, and we have all our schools programmed starting next Monday to do what they call the pre- and post-occupancy flush. I've asked many professionals that I have relationships with here in the Midlands area, and also Synergistics employees, and the number one thing they tell me is ventilation. You've got to have proper ventilation before, during, and after school occupancy. So we've worked with Synergistic to get all our building automation programs set to have that 2-hour flush prior to occupancy, then 2 hours post-occupancy. I will tell you, we are still looking at filter upgrades or bipolar ionization retrofits. Some of the MERV 13 filters that go into the HVAC units, we do have concerns on how they will affect unit performance. And so we're looking into that, and we don't want this to be a short-term, whatever investment we make, it's going to be a substantial investment. Right. And so we want to make sure it's here for the long term and provides benefits, hopefully beyond this fall. We have purchased air purifiers for all our nurses' offices, and we also have purchased a large number of air purifiers that we can place in schools should we need to. Let's say we have a COVID case in a classroom, we could place these purifiers in the school overnight to run.
Is there a backlog of a lead time? I'm sure there's every school district in the country is looking for these things, right?
We've not heard of any issues with lead time as far as the filters or ionization. Again, we have not made decision which route we're going to go, but I'm not aware of any at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hammond.
Mine, I think, would be for Dr. Harris, or Dr. Milton will direct me. In the reentry hardships, if I know that it's a process, but I also remember you saying, like, when you said a medical exemption is one example of an exemption, but then at the end it was like provided space is available. If it would be, Dr. Milton, a real medical problem about it, I worried a little bit if we didn't have space, would there be more, we could accommodate that, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes, ma'am, and I'll ask Dr. Harris to make his way, and I'll pull the slide back up for you all to see visually. Dr. Harris is working on an individual basis with each family with confidential conversations, but we have the process outlined, so I pulled that visual back up so that if Dr. Harris needed to reference this slide, we'd have access to it. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Absolutely. We always want to make certain that we are paying close attention, as we have said in previous meetings and throughout the years of our enrollment and here throughout School District 5. But obviously, there is a documented medical concern. Obviously, that has great high consideration that we want to try to fulfill and honor those requests. We ask that with all of the criteria that we have, that there is some supportive documentation. I mean, that really helps us to do a better job of making certain that students are in the placements in which they can thrive and do their very, very, very best.
Thank you.
Other questions for Dr. Melton? Mr. White.
I guess this is reentry of sorts, but I know I referred you a parent who had asked a question, and it was a unique question about seniors and close to graduation and having credits. But if they're doing all virtual, there may not be the offerings that they would have if they were doing the hybrid, and whether or not there was any way to either help them get other courses or help them adjust rather than making kids go through electives maybe they have no interest in. But I'm just curious, it was presented as this something for the board to deal with, but I referred them to you, but I'm just curious what your perspective is. Is this something that y'all are working with parents? I know it's not a great number of students, but it does seem to be some inequities. If they're starting in hybrid, they may have a greater course offering than if they're starting in virtual, where a school where they don't have a lot of virtual students. But I'm just curious, is that something the board needs to even address, or is that something y'all are addressing? And I just told them I'd bring it up tonight, because I think it is a unique problem that is probably, goes with all the other problems that we're finding as we try to venture into this new territory.
I'll see it as an opportunity, Mr. White, rather than a problem. I'll look to Mr. Giuliano to join me for this conversation with whatever I may omit that we need to share. I see this as an administrative responsibility, but of course, whatever report we need to make to the board, we are prepared to do that. I applaud Mr. Giuliano, Secondary Director, Mr. Presley, that's here, Dr. Blunt, who's a lead administrator for us with 5. We want to make sure that our hybrid program and our 5 program are rigorous in both ways, but of course, we have resources that we need to use appropriately. So we look for the course assignments that we're offering through 5. There may not be the number of courses that families may wish for, but our counselors and admin teams per school site, especially our secondary high school students, are working individually with families to make sure that we have students that are on schedule with their academic plans and en route to their aspirations of what they'd like to do. I'd like to ask the board, on behalf of the administration of our school sites and of the district administration, continue to refer parents to schools and to us so that we can be in partnership. When it comes to a student's academic choices, that's confidential, so we're not allowed to just have those discussions with people outside of that child's access of information. So it's important that we do things confidentially and with the utmost of care to guide them towards their next level of academic efforts. Mr. G., what would you like to add that maybe I've omitted as Chief Instruction Officer?
Thank you, Dr. Melton. I would like to add that we do have a board policy, IKG Secondary Education, which does state that our seniors must take 6 courses in their senior year. And a lot of that does have to do with making sure that we receive the adequate funding for students. And also, we've come to a point where our families, our communities expect these elective offerings and these course offerings and the course guide that we have in the detail that we have. If we were to start minimizing how many classes seniors took, then we would also open it up to less students taking certain elective classes, and we may not have classes that meet the requirements of the minimum number of students per class. We have that now already with a lot of classes. Some of the classes that we were not able to offer in 5 was because we did not have many students even trying to register for those courses in the first place. We have been able to allow that all of our students with the elective course offerings in 5, regardless of which high school they go to, they have the opportunity to take those elective offerings in 5 in that course guide for 5, as long as there's the minimum number of students enrolled in that class. So similar as it would be in hybrid or traditional scheduling, As long as there is the minimum number of students enrolled in that class, we can offer that course. So we've been able to accommodate that through our 5 program. And one thing I'll say too, Dr. Melton, is when I have meetings with other Midland school districts, and as I look to see the offerings that we have in 5 in comparison to a lot of our neighbors, we offer many more courses. And the difference that we're offering too is we're using our teachers. A lot of districts are using programs to teach students to get these courses. Our district and our school board has always wanted to maintain the accuracy of our diploma and the strict rigor that we have in our courses by having our teachers teach these courses. So we're trying to stay away from programs to teach our kids. We're trying to make sure our teachers teach our kids. But even with the offerings that we're offering using our own teachers, we're still offering many more AP and honors courses and elective courses than many of our neighbors are doing, especially using our own teachers. So I do want to make sure that we highlight the fact that we're trying to accommodate as many parents as possible, but we're not going to be able to accommodate every single course request that we can in a 5 or in hybrid as well.
Dr. Melton, if a student, let's say they were enrolled in 5, they were a senior, they need 3 credit hours, the policy requires 6. I think some of that's tied to State Department policy as well. Are they allowed to use a program like, could they take 3, 5 classes and 2 or 3 SC virtual classes? And then a follow-up to that, if a parent was in a position that they were having trouble rounding out this total number, is that parent able to appeal, I guess through Mr. Presley, then chief instruction, and then ultimately to the superintendent? Do they have those options?
Let me start there, Mr. Cates, if you don't mind. Mr. Giuliano referenced the policy, so we would ask the family to start there with the policy and make the waive request. It, of course, would be submitted to the school team, and then Mr. Presley would be the next person along the route for that. Anytime, of course, we are going below the threshold of the 6 for seniors, of course, because underclassmen have a different number per policy, we are jeopardizing the idea of funding, and of course, with the number of students that may choose to seek that waive, that would jeopardize funding, which would then jeopardize programs and FTEs. I'm trying not to use lingo here. That would jeopardize the number of teaching positions that we have. So, Mr. Giuliano, I'm not sure what else you'd like to add. There were 2 parts to your question. I answered the second, but what was?
Combination of 5 and another,
Yes.
like SC virtual.
So with the combination, we're working with that, and of course, we're offering the availability of choices to our families, but primarily our families prefer to work with our teachers, which is a huge compliment to School District 5. We're working with those with individual counseling to make sure that our guidance directors and our guidance team can personalize and answer those questions, but there are some available options through those virtual SC opportunities. Mr. G, what would you like to add that I've overlooked?
The only thing I'll add is that the course has to be available in SC Virtual as well. Not all courses are available in SC Virtual. We do use our APEX program as well to fill in some of those gaps. So we do have other opportunities, but through APEX, we're also using our own teachers as well. But we do have the ability to offer some additional courses. But the course has to be offered in SC Virtual, and it has to be available to the student as well once they register for that course through SC Virtual, because there are limits.
Thank you. Mr. Lovelace.
Yeah, I got 2 questions, but Mr. Giuliano, did I hear you say that if you're a student at any of our high schools, in any of our 4 high schools, that if a course is offered in 5, that anyone at any one of those high schools can take that no matter if that's their home school or not?
Yes, that's correct. As long as it fits within their schedule, and as long as it meets the minimum enrollment numbers for that course. As long as the course makes and it fits within the student's schedule, and it's in the 5 course guide, our families have been able to take that. So what our counselors have been doing is working with the families and trying to see what can fit into their schedules.
So just for a point of clarity, we say a course makes, that's some of our jargon. The minimum class size per policy, we have to make sure that that number's there, and that's any given year. That's not unique to this school year. So Mr. Giuliano and Mr. Presley are monitoring the number of students that are in each of the sections that we're offering. We've got to make sure we have the minimum number. But yes, sir, they can be enrolled as a student of, you could be in 5 of a high school being in a class with students from other high schools in the district through the 5 model. Yes, sir.
And the other question I had, I've talked to you about that, Dr. Melton. Are there any plans for a virtual Q&A town hall meetings?
Yes, sir. So Mr. Lovelace has asked this question consistently, opening up some conversations across the district. It has been my decision thus far, in consultation with others, that I've not done anything live. We've watched the numbers of those that are participating with these meetings. The last 3 meetings, we had over 1,700, over 1,600, and nearly 1,000 the last meeting that we've had. So a lot of our questions are being answered. Our reentry address has settled. Ms. Goggins and her team are to be commended because they have answered all the questions that we've had submitted, unless some have been submitted this afternoon. So she and her team continue to answer those. When you watch the University of South Carolina as an example and see that President Caslin had a meeting that was disrupted by some folks that dropped in, that is not a situation that I'm comfortable entering into. That is not to be any kind of a statement about our technology platform. Ms. Garris and her team and Mr. Richardson with his supervision are always commended for what we're trying to do in School District 5. But anytime you open it up to a live environment, you could risk the opportunity of a situation comparable with President Caslin. Our advisories are active and working. Our parent leaders are engaged. Our faculty advisory are engaged. And Ms. Lodehold and Ms. Goggins have sent out invitations recently to bring in our new parent leaders through our parents cabinet and our new faculty advisories. So I am comfortable with the number of advisories that we're having underway. Ms. Goggins is very receptive to interviews. You heard her say during her remarks this evening that we've recently had some on-site reporters that are highlighting and capturing film of what we're doing. And she is always in connection with our local media, whether it's print media or whether it's broadcast media. So, Mr. Lovelace, to summarize the summary, no, sir, it has not been my wishes to this point to offer a virtual live experience for a variety of reasons, to include those I've highlighted.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you. Dr. Melton, I know that we had some parents or some people express some concern about the opt-out form. I think it was IHAE, and I was just wondering if you could update us on that.
Yes, ma'am, be happy to. Thank you for the question. This was an item we brought forth last board meeting and fielded some questions from board members both in the meeting and before the meeting. And Mr. Giuliano and his team went back to review the information. Can't find Mr. G in the room, so to make sure I don't forget anything, Mr. G, I'm not asking you to come back to the podium unless I forget something, but I couldn't find you. So when he went back and reviewed it with his team, the recommendation to me was that we pull that and not proceed with adding that as an exhibit to the policy. We try to be very responsive to the feedback that we received. It was a model that was sent to us by the South Carolina School Boards Association, but we made the decision for School District 5. It did not necessarily fit the vision of 5 nor the aspirations of what we're trying to create with customer service. Mr. G, did I forget anything you'd like to add? Thank you.
Ms. Hammond.
Dr. Milton, this is a question for some students and parents, and it may have been answered by from your website, but I promised to ask you, and I know you have your answer. The SAT was canceled by for some students, and I would like you to explain why and what their options are. I've called parents back, but I wanted to be sure I have your exact advice.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Hammond. Mr. Richardson was involved with this, as well as our high school principals. Mr. Richardson works with, of course, facilities usage. So when we have groups that want to come in and use School District 5 facilities, there were some tests that were scheduled during the month of August. I don't have those dates handy because I wasn't necessarily prepared for that. But the dates that were scheduled for August were before we reopened to having our students on campus. So Mr. Richardson has worked with our high school teams to make sure that when we do reopen our facilities, we can have the appropriate people to staff, because this is staffed by whichever vendor, SAT or ACT, that we're hosting for. They use staff members that they recruit to work within the testing sites within our facilities. So Mr. Richardson has worked with our high school principals using our facilities usage policies. And if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Richardson, we're going to resume testing for ACT and SAT in September. That is, okay. So the dates may not be on the same rotation, but we will have testing occurring within School District 5 during the month of September. Those are not testing sessions that we accommodate nor schedule. That's through the testing vendor. So it will be up to families to make sure they work through that registration process to have the chance to have an available seat for those testing sessions. Ms. Richardson, did I forget anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Dr. Melton. No, actually, you covered it pretty well, but I will say that there are several dates that have been scheduled for the remainder of this year. Really, the only one, and I can't recall how many for both ACT and SAT. The only one that we've taken action on by counseling was I believe, August 29th
It's 29th,
schedule.
yeah.
Yes. That's,
While Mr. Richardson's there, the people these parents that have paid, I know they just are supposed to, it isn't with the district, it's actually the SAT office, but would they be guaranteed? They've been trying to do what you told me to tell them, but they haven't been able to reschedule, but they've paid their money. Well, that'll be nothing to do with us for counseling. If they don't get, say, a space, but they've already paid, would they probably get their money back from SAT?
I'm sure they would, but based on the very few circumstances I've heard about, most, and I don't know about all, but I know the ones that we've spoken with have been able to reschedule.
Well, I know two parents that haven't, and they were really hoping to have it in August, because they'd had their children take a course so it's sort of in their head, so they hate to be waiting on it. So I just told them what I learned from the district office, that they have to deal with SAT personnel, but they could not, they had no spaces for them. So I'll just tell them to deal with, we will have it, though, in September and October. I can tell them that.
Well,
There are several
Yes.
dates throughout the year.
we have scheduled for September to be a first date. Now, assuming all this is subject to change, just
I
like
get
any
it,
other
I get
time.
it.
Ms. Hammond, I think the only concern I would have to add to that would be if the student, of course, did not show, that would be non-refundable. But because it was
Right.
on the cancellation of the site to offer the test administration, there should be no problems with being refunded for that, or either using those funds towards another. But we're not involved with that because we don't receive those
Right.
funds. That is something they do through that testing association.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. White?
I was just curious, a gentleman last time had raised some concerns about the cleaners and the residue they leave, and I'm just curious, have y'all evaluated that, and are the stuff that we're cleaning with, are we comfortable that it's safe for the long-term use, assuming there's sediments it leaves behind?
As Mr. Cannon makes his way back to the podium, there has been extensive training. There are products that are approved through the State Department of Education, and then, of course, the vendors that we're using, they have to have their credentialing. I'll refer to it in educational terms. Mr. Cannon may have a different way to describe that. So, Mr. Cannon, if you'll talk a little about what we're doing currently to make sure that the cleaning we're using is safe, especially for those students that may have health issues that may be sensitive to certain cleaning solutions.
Sure. So the disinfectant we use is a Green Seal certified medical grade disinfectant. It's EPA approved. The disinfectant the gentleman spoke of at the last board meeting is a state provided. It's actually what the state is providing for bus transportation. I did contact the vendor after that meeting and asked, hey, have you heard any issues with this? And they said, if it's overdosed, you might could see it's got chlorine in it. So they said if it's overdosed, you might could see some residue, but if it's used properly, they've not had any issues. And again, it's a state provided disinfectant. Miss BioTab is the name of it.
Mr. Lovelace?
Dr. Milton, I think Ms. Gardner at the last meeting was looking at the numbers that were presented, and I may be wrong, but it seemed that there were about 2,500 people that students that didn't answer the survey. Have we honed in on that to see, exactly how many, that aren't going to be back or that you suspect aren't going to be back?
Mr. Lovelace, I don't know that Mr. Holden's going to his notebook I see over there,
Getting his
because
laptop
if you were not here last time, it is not characteristic of Mr. Holden to carry a notebook. Typically, he has a laptop for those that know him well. So when I see the notebook out, I suspect he's pulling it up. I don't know that, I'd ask Mr. Holden not to speak to numbers if he's not confident the numbers are accurate, because we need to be consistent with the previous presentation. So I'm going to look to you to see if you'd like to come to the podium with that information. But as you transition, now that I see you in motion, we have a process for you all to know, you and the community to know, if we have a family that was non-responsive, we are assigning them to work with the hybrid model. So as we are getting the messaging out to make sure that families understand if they missed the window,
Yes.
if they had a distraction within their family, if they were out of town, if they were disengaged, whatever that situation may have been, then our staff are working with them individually, and then when appropriate, they're reaching out to their schools and our team that connect with the district level, whether it's our social workers that Dr. Harris works with, our parent educators, our counselors, whichever resource they're most comfortable with. Mr. Holden, do you have that information with accuracy that you could share this evening based on the report you gave last time?
Yes, we did have a percentage of students that we've continued to make contact with. Some of them who expressed that they did not have time to complete the survey or did not complete the survey during the window. As Dr. Melton mentioned, those students have been assigned to the hybrid model, and they have the ability to complete a hardship request through Dr. Harris's office. We've made contact with many parents that way. As we have worked to reschedule high school students and build their new schedules for them in 5 or in the hybrid model, we have made contact with more parents through that process as well. So we have continued to address that number and continue to reach out to parents and families over the last several days and since the close of the window. I can't give you an exact number, but I can tell you we've continued to hear from more parents and continue to work with them to address their needs and their specific concerns they have. And that's been happening at the school level across the district.
And I'd like to echo the presentation from last time. Mr. Holden reached out to our school administrators on a Monday, and we immediately saw an increase with our response rate because our principals and their designees got directly involved with calling for those that we saw that were not responsive, and because of their relationships, we very quickly got the numbers up.
All right, thank you, Dr. Melton.
Yes, sir. So now we're going to move into our second report this evening. This is our update on the progress and processes of the growth forecasting and the redistricting services by Malona McBroom. Dr. Harris has come into the microphone. This, of course, is part 2. Our presenters this evening are joining us online virtually. Dr. Harris is going to get us started with the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Melton. I'm certainly privileged to introduce, and I guess at this juncture present, our presenters from Malona McBroom, Mr. Mike Zuba and Mr. Patrick Gallagher, who are here to give us updates regarding, since we last met, or since we last had the conversation regarding redistricting, updates regarding our growth forecasting options here in School District 5. And prior to them coming forward, I'd simply like to share that it was important that we found a group that not only understood school operations, but also understood what it took, the intricacies and the details of long-range planning. Long-range planning 10, 15, 20 years out. And while we have a number of staff in our schools and maybe in our districts who understand school operations, we come up very short in terms of persons who understand the details and intricacies, as I indicated, regarding long-range planning here in our district. So we found it important that we found a group that understood that and could operationalize that and bring that forward for a presentation to the community tonight, subsequently to the board for your information as well on tonight. So Mr. Patrick Gallagher, Mr. Mike Zuba, we turn the floor over to you at this time.
He's muted.
We're
He's
going to
muted.
pause 1 minute, Mr. Zuba, because I see you are not muted, but we cannot hear you. So we're going to give our technology staff just a moment. And while we're doing that, Mr. Gallagher, let's check in to make sure. Mr. Zuba, can you try to check in for me, if you hear me? Okay, hold on 1 second. Let's, I'm looking for some guidance.
This can happen to students and teachers too.
Can we check Mr. Gallagher's?
Mr. Gallagher, can you do a mic check, see if we can hear you? No, we cannot. Hold on one second. No, I don't know who's working behind me there, but if we need to have them call in instead of Google Meet, we can do that as well.
Technology is a great thing.
Mr. Cates, I regret that we are having this disruption. I'm going to look to Dr. Harris to see if perhaps we can bring a phone to the podium, and if we need to connect with the phone, do you have one call or both, Dr. Harris? Is this Mr. Zuba or this Mr. Gallagher? Okay. And if you want to come back to this, if we need to talk you through the slides that we have as far as information for this. Excuse me. Mr. Zuba, this is.
Technology is great.
All right, Mike, Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Zuba, can you do a sound check for us?
Will do.
Look into our technology team. Test 1, 2. If you'll test it for us, Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Zuba.
Hello? Should I do the sound check over the phone and mute the computer?
I am fearful that this may create more of uncomfort than it would. Mike, I'm going to disconnect. We're going to try something different. If perhaps our technology team could get us a conference call or something like that. Mr. Cates, I regret this has happened. I can talk you through the slides if you'd like and then ask them to weigh in on answers, but I fear that we will not be able to have the proper engagement with Q&A at this time if I regret this has occurred, of course.
Yes, ma'am, and we understand the challenge here. I'm inclined to move forward and come back when I get a thumbs up, either having them on a call or when we've been able to reconnect, if that is appropriate.
With your permission, I'll ask Dr. Harris and Ms. Garris, I'm not sure where her location is, but if maybe they could talk offline behind the screens with whoever needs to be included with that. And if Mr. Cates, if you could proceed. Ms.
Yes, ma'am.
Goggins, if you could join Dr. Harris and Ms. Richardson. Is Ms. Garris in the room or is she? No, okay.
So we're going to allow our technology staff time, and y'all can take that off the screen while you work on that if you choose, and we will let you connect that. We're not closing out that agenda item, but I am going to move on to item number 9.